Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back. Well, today's a little bit different episode than what you're used to seeing on the channel. Unfortunately, today there will be no cutting, no grinding whatsoever on any cars, but instead we're going to be doing a whole bunch of welding, a whole bunch of grinding, a lot of work, because I'm building something that frankly I'm long overdue for having, and that is a frame jig. I do a whole bunch of these Plymouth B bodies and E bodies and a lot of unibody cars, and really when I started the channel with the Charger and I basically had to rebody the entire thing, doing frame rails and everything else, I should have built one back then. And to date, I've kind of gotten away with taking measurements and essentially, suspending frame rails up in the air, making sure that all fits together, welding it together. And again, so far it's worked out just fine. I haven't had any issues, but again, when you're doing full frame rails, you really should have a frame jig. And I'm looking to take on some much more ambitious builds than what you guys have seen so far. Some real rusty shit boxes, if I'm going to be honest with you, and we are absolutely going to need a frame jig. Now, looking here at our 1970 Plymouth Superbird Tribute, you guys have seen all the work done to date on this car. Just finished up the floors. That was the last video I put out. But these rear frame rails gotta go, and they're going to be cut out of this car. Now, before I do that, I need to make sure that the new frame rails are going to go in the exact same place, and that's why you build a frame jig. And what I'm thinking about doing here is that I want one that's very precise, where more or less I kind of have like a saddle with a pin, and have that pin come up through the holes that are on the bottom sides of the frame rail, as well as mounting right here to the rear shackle mounts, just to make sure that everything is basically exactly where it was before I started cutting. Now, thankfully, I stopped cutting when I did, because nothing's really moving around here at all. It's still very solid, very sturdy, and I'm glad. Because we're going to be using this car as a reference to build a frame jig. Now, the other day, hopped on Marketplace, had a sweet score. I bought a whole bunch of metal here for about 250 bucks. I've got 3 or 4 more sticks of 4x4 by 1/8 inch tubing in the backyard, but really my main support beams here are 3x6 by 1/4 inch. They are freaking heavy, my God. It's going to be a chore moving this thing around, but the good thing is it's going to be on casters, and I'm also going to be putting leveling feet on it so we can get it exactly flat and even. My shop floor is an absolute disaster, nowhere close to being level. And yeah, once I get the car mounted on it, just to make sure that everything is exactly where it needs to be, we'll be able to level it with some adjustable leveling feet that'll come here in just a little bit. Now, there isn't a whole lot out there in terms of building these frame jigs. There's a lot of companies, AMD to Graveyard Cars, to a lot of the other bigger YouTube channels that have all built these, and I've never really seen a good video on how people do it. And so I started sketching out things very roughly here. My long support beams are 15 feet long. Those are the 3x6 pieces there. Thankfully, they came that long. I don't know if they could have been much shorter than that, because really from the radiator support to the shackle mounts in the back, it's almost exactly 15 feet. So if we need to add a little bit more, we can. But those worked out perfect for me. And then the jig itself is going to be 40 inches wide. So I took some measurements on the car. Basically everything that I plan on mounting this jig to, like the rear spring mounts and all the pin mounts, are typically like right at or right within 40 inches underneath of the car. So these should work out really, really good. Now, those of you guys familiar with the Plymouth B bodies, or most cars out there, most manufacturers do put out some sort of a chassis diagram. Most of the time these are completely illegible. You can't really see the numbers. You don't know if it's a 6 or an 8 or what, but I found a pretty good one here that's a good resolution. I will throw a link below for you guys to see. But a lot of people take a look at these, they see all the lines, all the numbers, and they say, forget it. It looks good enough. We're just going to leave it how it is. So I'm going to take a little bit of the guesswork out of this, guys. With these unibodies, they're all built on a datum line. And that is like if the car was perfectly level, what the reference is to each part on the car. And you can see here with the front frame rails, with the rear frame rails, kind of what the references are off of this datum line. So to simplify that, you guys can see here my fancy frame jig. There will be some wheels here on the bottom as well. But you know, our datum line is essentially going to be the top rail on the frame jig. So you can see here, it's obviously upside down right now, but once we get it flipped over, we will basically be taking all the measurements off of the top rail and applying it to the factory diagram just to make sure that everything is the right height and exactly where it needs to be. Now, when I get this thing all welded together, I get the wheels on it, I'll take a good hard look at it to see if I want the car mounted higher or mounted lower off of this jig. And you know what? If I need to go higher off of this, let's say I wanted it 6 inches higher than, you know, whatever's on here on the diagram, all I would do is that I would add 6 inches from this datum line here to all the measurements on here, and just to lift the car a little bit higher. But don't make it any more complicated than what it is. And I hope this video greatly simplifies this and takes a little bit of the guesswork and a little bit of the magic out of this, because it's really not rocket science at all, okay? So like I said, I've already got everything all prepped out. I've got all of it cleaned up, and it's pretty much ready to start tacking and welding together. So, you know, make sure you take your time at this stage, make sure it's all square, it's all exactly where you want it, and don't go running crazy beads down everything without having it all tacked together first, because you may think that all this big heavy duty metal is not going to move around on you. Oh, it'll bend and twist on you all right, believe me. So you don't want to do that. So like I said, we'll go around, throw some tacks here on all the legs, get everything exactly where we want it, and then weld her solid and get it flipped over, which thank God I have a lift. I don't know how I would get it flipped over any other way. I mean, maybe an engine hoist, but yeah, we're just gonna strap it onto the lift, lift it up, and get her flipped over. But enough talking, guys. Hopefully this gives you a good enough idea here of what we're gonna be doing today. And man, I can't wait to have the car mounted on this. It's gonna make life so much easier. So yeah, let's go ahead and get suited up and let's get welding on this brand new frame jig. Alrighty you guys, well it's day 2 out here. Burned some midnight oil last night. Got the entire frame of this thing all welded together. Turned out really good. It's a whole lot of welding, I tell you what. Good thing I've got enough wire and enough gas to at least get me through the weekend here. But no, it turned out really nice. Now, with having the floor, I mentioned it is like super uneven, and I even saw that, you know, trying to weld it together when it's upside down, just trying to make sure that these are all nice and even and flush across all 4 corners. But, you know, having a way to level out the entire thing with some adjustable feet is an absolute must. So there's another channel called Cam Racing. The dude he does some incredible work on a Charger that he's got going right now on his Duster. But he made a really nice frame jig, and he used something similar to this, which is probably the simplest way that you're gonna get to have some adjustable feet. Now, I've got basically a 1-inch all thread, 4 nuts, and a big washer here that I've already welded to the bottom. But I'm gonna have to put a bracket or something off of like each corner of this. We'll weld the nuts to that. We'll put another bracket over the top of the 2 nuts here to make sure it's super strong. But yeah, all you do, throw a ratchet or an impact on that top piece, push this down, and this little leveling foot here will push on the floor, and it's gonna help us get everything nice and level. So real simple, real easy. Got everything from my local Ace Hardware to do that. Now, another thing too, after I was kind of taking a step back last night and looking at everything, you know, got nice flush fitment here, but then when you look, it is kind of welded to the side, and everything is going to be braced off of these side pieces here. So wanted to add a little bit more strength. So put together some of these real simple kind of triangle bracket pieces here. And I already did that side and this side right here. But again, just trying to put as much strength into this thing as I can. We don't want any flex, and yeah, gives me a little bit more reassurance. But well, I'm gonna finish up getting the last 2 of those brackets in. Gonna come up with a way to get these feet mounted on there, and then we're gonna give it a shot with leveling it all up. And while I'm doing that, my man T-Bone over here has been DA sanding this entire frame all morning. Once everything is completely done, we'll come back through here with like some Eastwood rust encapsulator or some Por 15 and coat the entire thing so it's nice and beautiful. So you ready to get to work?
Yeah.
All right, let's get it done. Alrighty guys, well the frame is all done and it's all level. I'm really happy with how everything has turned out so far. So you guys saw me right there just with the impact, went ahead and hit these little screw jack setups here. They work really, really good. I did have an issue after I welded on the support brackets there, just with the nuts getting too hot, and ended up tightening real tight around the threads there. So it took me quite a bit of time to let them cool down, as well as running them up and down about 20 times a piece with the impact there, and threw a whole bunch of the AMSOIL metal protectant on there. It's basically like WD-40. And yeah, they're silky smooth now and good to go. I went ahead, boxed in the ends here of the support rails, and really guys, at this point, everything is welded up and it's looking good. I'm ready to throw some paint on this, but we still have a whole lot of other work to do on it. But yeah, everything worked out good, super easy to level. And man, it's taken a long time. It's taken me about 2 days just to get to this point right here, and still have a whole lot of work to do. So from here, gonna get it back on the wheels, wheel it outside, get the car up here on the lift, make sure the rockers are level, make sure it's level side to side, lift it up high enough to wheel this thing back in here. We've got a plumb bob, basically center the car on the rails and get it all level, get the jig level to the car that's level, and slowly lower it down until we get to our data measurements there, and then we can start measuring all the support brackets and everything in between. So of course we're going to be running a bunch of rails here kind of in between these two here. Those all measure 37 inches. I've got 2 of them already cut from that 20-foot stick that I had earlier. But yeah, gonna try to at least get the car mounted up on here, and then from there can make all sorts of different references to the jig, to the car, so that way everything mounts up exactly like I want it. So that way we can start cutting on the car and slide them rails in exactly where they were previous. So yeah guys, it's not super difficult. Just take your time, make sure it's all square, make sure it's all level, and do your stretches. There's a whole lot of welding involved in this, and not the most comfortable positions. So enough talking, let's get this out of here and let's get this car up on the lift. Alright you guys, so a couple days have passed since I got the car up onto the lift. Unfortunately, the entire house ended up getting sick again, so finally feeling good enough to be out here. And it's a good day, because today the car is going to go up onto the jig. Now, before I took a few days off here, I did go ahead and leveled the entire car out. So front to back, side to side, it is perfectly leveled out. And I must say, I've definitely had the cars up here very crooked in the past. The car looks very level too. Looks nice and flat, front to back, and overall looking really nice. Now, I went ahead, positioned the jig underneath of it, used the leveling feet there, along with just a real simple level here, and we have the jig squared up to the car, which is a big deal. Now, I went ahead and also went to Harbor Freight, picked up a couple plumb bobs for like $2 a piece, put them on all 4 corners of the car, and yeah, it's exactly where it needs to be. So from this point, I can now lift the car up out of the way, weld in my support pieces, and one by one start to put the actual pins underneath of it for, you know, my way to actually locate the car onto the jig. Now, initially I was thinking, you know, how am I gonna actually get it to mount? Now I've seen guys, you know, throw like a full-on bolt through it with a nut and like screw the car down to the jig, and I guess you could do that. But I was thinking more or less to utilize the holes in the frame rails and then basically have this underneath of the car, set the car down on top of it, and you know exactly where everything is lining up. So let me just show you guys here on our brand new frame rail, but essentially the pin would line up perfectly with the holes in the frame rails. And so that's kind of what I was going for. Now I did run to my local hardware store. I found some just black pipe, like gas line pipe, and by the time I got it shrunk down to where it needed to be, it is like paper thin. So that ain't gonna work. The best way to do this, of course, would be to take some round stock like actual bar stock and machine it down and get it just underneath of an inch, because that's basically what it is. But instead I opted to do it the cheap route. So I took some 1/4-inch plate, threw a big giant bolt on there, the biggest that I could find at the hardware store. I've got it mounted up to the actual plate itself. From there I ended up expanding the size of the pin by simply just boogering a whole bunch of weld on top of that. Now, before you start blasting me in the comments, okay, from there I went ahead, hit it with a grinder, smoothed it all out, and now I have a perfect pin that the car is going to sit on. Now, it did take quite a bit of work to get this thing to actually fit as good as what I wanted it to, but really from here I can now pin the bottom of the car, and you guys can see that is like damn near, well, there's some rust on top of it, but it is like perfectly flat on the bottom of that frame rail. And that's exactly what I was looking for. So no side to side play whatsoever. And the same exact pin size is basically just about every single hole in the frame rails and the torsion support, and also the front frame rails as well. So we can use the same exact style for everything. Now I have identified kind of 8 points that I'm going to use at least the pins, as well as making some sort of a simple bracket setup to bolt the bumper brackets to the jig in the front, and then also the spring shackle mount here in the back right through here. So that way we know where everything is supposed to go. The more pins you put in this, the more precise it's going to be, and the better everything is going to fit. Now the true test, and we're going to come back and look at this at the end of the episode, but of course with the car up on the lift, it is, you know, being lifted only from the middle here, so the body panels are shifting a little bit, and you guys can see that door is higher than the quarter panel. So hopefully when we get weight distributed across the entire car, when the front of the car is actually supported, when the back of the car is supported, everything should relax and should be nice and flat, just like it was on the ground. So the first 2 points where I've identified that I'm going to support are underneath of the torsion support here in the middle, as well as underneath of the front of the rear frame rails. Basically this hole right here. So, and what that'll do, looking back at our chassis diagram, is that's going to give me right here, our 6-inch point here. So once I get those on, can get the car set down on top of it, we can then start taking our measurements and our reference points here to make sure that everything is lining up with what the factory specs are. So whole lot of talking. I can actually talk today, which is a good thing. But yeah, I'm ready to get this car up and do some welding and get this thing mounted on the jig. So let's get to it. Alrighty, you guys, skipping ahead just a little bit here, I wanted to show you this front brace setup. So for the sake of simplicity, and also precision at the same time, went ahead, I took a piece of 1/4-inch plate, drilled 2 holes in it for my bumper bolts here. You can see those are in and torqued down nice and tight, so it's firm against the car. And then I went ahead and took my piece of 4x4, cut 1 inch out of it, so now it's a 3x4, because if I were to left it just the square tube, it would be too wide to be able to access those bolts right there. And so really from this point, I can go ahead, square this up on my jig, make sure it's level this way, go ahead and tack it in, and it should be good to go. Now, keeping myself honest here, the measurement on the chassis diagram here is from this front hole to the top rail of the jig. It is 13 5/8. I promise you it is 13 5/8. The other side was just a little bit off, and so I ended up taking a jack with a block of wood there, jacked up that corner just a touch, and got that side also to 13 5/8. So triple check my measurements here. Once everything's good to go ahead, put this piece up in here, tack it in, and we should be good to go. Now, this is a really big step, because after this, we can officially take the car off of the lift and actually put the weight all the way on the jig, and I bet you it's gonna also settle in our door gaps at the top there. So let's go ahead, we'll get these 2 tacked in, and we'll take a look up top and see how it's all looking. Alrighty guys, I pretty much got this figured out now with the back shackle mount. So went ahead, took some 1/4-inch plate material, 1-inch OD tube, lined everything up real nice, and it's buttery smooth. So looking here at the rear spring mount, obviously it gets mounted in the car like this. The trunk pan sits on top. So in essence, I will be lowering the car onto this open bracket, be able to line up our rear spring mounts here, and I will be able to then pin this thing into place. And of course it's hard to get in because I'm holding it with one hand. There we go. But I've given myself just a little bit of flexibility here, just a touch of side to side, and that's exactly how it's gonna work. So already went ahead, worked ahead just a little bit, got the car, at least this passenger side, all ready to go. And again, like everything else, just trying to keep it as simple as possible. And you guys can see here just how the mount is set up. So I have a little bit of space, a little bit of leeway. This pin is just a touch bigger than the one that I showed you guys, but you can still see spins really nice into place. And I didn't show you guys, but the chassis diagram measurement is 16 7/8 from the center of this rear shackle bolt or rear shackle mount to our datum line, which is the top of the frame jig. And I'm not even going to show you guys the measuring tape because you won't be able to see anyways, but I promise you it is exactly where it needs to be. And what's also really nice to see is looking across all of our other mounts underneath the car, 0 daylight whatsoever. So everything is sitting, it's all relaxing really nice into place. And especially getting these rear springs or these rear spring mounts into place, the rest of it should be pretty easy. But as I'm going, I am kind of pinning everything into place, and even as I add the additional pins underneath of the car here, because we've still got, these 2 and basically 4 more underneath the car, I am kind of putting all of it exactly where it needs to be to measure it out, take it all back apart, lift the car up, install it all, pin everything back together, just to make sure everything is exactly where it should be, and not welding anything in solid. You guys can see here, this is all just tacked. Those mounts underneath the car are tacked just in case I need to break anything free. But so far so good. Haven't had to cut any welds so far with this job. Alrighty guys, last time talking in this video, I promise, just wrapped up the last of the 2 back supports here, and I wanted to show you how good the fitment is here. Look at this. In the rear shackle mounts. The other side's even better than this. I'm so happy with this. Look at that. So now if we set the car down and the weight is completely off the lift, it is just sitting on top of the jig. We have nice flush fitment, no gaps anywhere on any of the pads across the entire thing. The car is still sitting nice and level, and I got fitment like that. I'm stoked, beyond stoked. All right, let's finish this thing up, get it painted, and let's wrap up this video. Alrighty guys, well the boys and I stayed out here super late last night and we got the jig completely finished up, and I am so damn happy to be done with this job. You know, it took the better part of 3 weeks to do what I feel is about a mile worth of welding wire to do, and man, so much work. But I tell you what, it is gonna make life so much easier to know that when I cut the back half out of this car, I know that everything is gonna go back in the exact place that it was supposed to. You know, we've cut cars in half, we've cut the CUDA in half, the Charger. You know, this car is pretty much gonna be cut in half, and having the peace of mind to know that everything is exactly where it's supposed to be is gonna make the body panels fit so much better. You're not gonna have a car that tracks crooked or anything like that. And you know, for years to come, I'll be able to continue rebuilding these cars and saving these cars. And believe me guys, this is a fairly easy build. I have much more ambitious builds coming up on the channel that we will absolutely have to have something like this. So, you know, I did clean up a few things. I went ahead, I boxed in all the open areas here, so it's all sealed up. There's nothing, you know, nowhere that water is going to really get into this at all. It's completely welded solid, and yeah, completely coated. And really at this point, kind of the true test is just going to make sure that the car actually goes back down on it, which shouldn't have any issue. You know, everything was tacked together really nicely before I went ahead and finished welded all of it. But no, I'm excited to be done with jig work, really excited to be back on framework so we can get the rails out of this car, get them swapped out, get the quarters on, finish this thing up, and get it out of here. But without further ado, the last check, we're gonna fit it onto the jig, take one final look, and wrap up this video. So let's get this car down onto the jig. Alrighty, you guys, so the car is back on the jig, and I could not be more excited because that means this job is almost done. So everything went back into place really nice. We got our shackle pins here in the back, got the bumper bolts here in the front. Everything is sitting super flat, and man, everything went back together really, really nice. And yeah, could not be more relieved. This is a massive, massive job. And quite honestly, I'm ready to cut the rust out of this car and get back to work on it. So you guys can look forward to frame rails, trunk pan, inner fender, outer wheelhouse, quarter panels. I don't know if I already said that. Yeah, still got a lot to do, but this is a huge check off the list, and it's gonna make sure that it's done right. So I hope this video has taken a bit of the guesswork out of it. If you guys are looking to build frame jigs, it's really not that hard, guys. The chassis diagram's out there. I know it looks confusing, but when you break it down and you actually start looking at the car and you do your cross measurements, you do, you know, all your datum measurements, all that kind of stuff, it's actually pretty simple. It's not too bad to do. So, but hopefully as a result, it makes the cars that I build straighter. It makes the cars you guys also build straight as well, and hopefully they last a little bit longer. But with that, guys, thank you all so much for watching. If you have not done so yet, please hit that subscribe button, and man, I think I'm gonna rest a day, get back out here, and let's wrap this car up. So take care. I'll see you all again real soon.